Welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. Check us out at teamwildfire.com, where we're building some pretty cool stuff. We're using jet engines to blow out wildfires and figuring out how to use AI so that we can know where to put the jet engines and how to allocate resources on fire. So if I sound excited about that, it's because I am. I've got with us today Gilberto DeSalvo, and Gilberto DeSalvo and I have something in common. We're both CEOs of startup companies, and we were both chatting a moment ago about the unique challenges of that, which sometimes feel almost as challenging as how we're going to conquer the wildfire problem. Gilberto, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you, Steve. I'm doing great today, and thanks for having us on here. I'm really excited to see how our perspectives align on the wildfire problem that we're both tackling. And like you said, startups definitely a challenge, but it's been a real fun ride.
Right. A startup is a challenge. Wildfires are a challenge. So clearly we are just gluttons for punishment here. Gilberto, you're running a company called Delphire. What is Delphire working on? What's your take on, or which aspect of the wildfire problem, of which there are many, are you focused on?
So Delphire is about monitoring those areas where there's blind spots today. A lot of the
Okay.
cameras are going on mountain tops, and that's not enough. That leaves a lot of blind areas where if a fire is starting, you might not know it early enough to deploy your technology, Steve.
Okay.
Delphire is making a Sentinel. This is a device that can be deployed anywhere using a solar panel and a battery, and it can operate anywhere where there is an LTE connection or through a satellite uplink. It will work in really remote areas.
And so
The-
do you pair it with a satellite uplink on each unit, or do you mesh them, or how do you do that?
we do it on each unit, and we put them generally several miles apart from each other. And the idea is to cover individual canyons where a fire might start, it might grow, and by the time it's growing, it's too late to put it out because it's roaring at that point. And the second point of our technology is to give early warning so that something can be done about the fire and it can be stopped in its tracks using technology like yours, Steve.
Well, thank you for the plug on that. Our technology has yet to prove itself, but yeah, we'll get there with it. I mean, they put out fires with jet engines in Kuwait, and they were oil well fires, so I'm pretty sure we could manage some trees, right? And then I know a lot of BTOs could be released by trees, but nothing like oil wells. So we'll see what goes on with that. So the technologies that we're working on would be complementary, right? That you would see something, and then some type of response would be mounted to it. And
Correct.
you and it sounds like what you're describing sounds like when I'm driving around, on my cell phone, and I get down in some little canyon, and all of a sudden I've got no service. Uh, and it sounds like, with the mountaintop cameras, it's the same thing. It's great if you're up on top of a mountain, you look out and you see the other mountaintops, but how do you know what's going on in those valleys in between? And if you have to wait for the smoke to get from the bottom of the valley all the way up to the top of the mountain and beyond before you could see it, you already got a pretty good fire on your hands.
Yep.
So you do you want to position down and look around, or position up and look down?
Both, really, depending on the situation and where the fire risk is coming from. And if you think about it, look at your community around you. Do you see a mountaintop, or do you see a bunch of little valleys or little canyons around you? Here in
I
California and
see
Colorado,
both.
you see
I'm in the
both.
mountains in Colorado, so I look up, I see the mountaintops. But given that most fires are started by humans, and humans travel on roads, and that
Hmm.
roads tend to be at the bottom of the in the valleys,
Yep.
then if I were positioning your camera, I'd put it where the people are, because they're the problem.
That's what we're doing, and yeah, we're
Hey,
looking at both communities and
okay,
placing these around communities for early warning, and placing them, at good vantage points along the valleys to get good visibility where there is none today. And the idea
okay,
behind that is to really lower the amount of time that it takes to detect a fire. For example, we've looked at some prescribed burns, And based on the starting point of those prescribed burns and when they can actually be detected from a nearby ridge, it can take up to an hour for the smoke to rise up to where it's detectable from a distance. That's a long
And
time.
that's a really long time, because so the fire has to develop to the point where it's sending its own smoke signals
Yep.
to to those high cameras.
Yep. And so you
And
got
you're
a
saying
smoldering.
don't let it get that high, or I mean, you might not be able to stop it from eventually getting there, but at least you're going to see it and know about it.
Yep.
So let's say I thought, I want to just put your cameras everywhere where, we need eyes. Is that the most cost effective solution?
Today, yes, because a lot of the other solutions that are available on the market simply don't give you that visual confirmation that we do.
Okay.
And if you get just a chemical detection or you put out some sensors out there that don't give you a visual confirmation, you still have to send somebody out there to confirm that you have a real issue before you respond to it. We do both in one step. And by lowering that time that it takes to confirm the issue, you know where to bring resources to bear on the fire and how large the fire is at any given time.
Okay. So we're a tiny community here, right? There's not a lot of people who are crazy enough to decide to make a living in wildfire innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So we know we have Dryad, we have N5. Like, these are sensor technologies. They sniff the air, they smell something, it doesn't smell right. They tell you something smells funny here, and it's
Yep.
probably a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Pano AI, and they're doing mountaintop cameras, and they look out across the hills and they use visual
Yep.
to determine a plume once it's gotten high enough to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you're wanting to use cameras to cover the areas that couldn't be seen, right, down in the valleys,
Mm-hmm.
in areas where there's a lot of, uh, you know, wildland urban interface, right?
Yep.
Now, are you interested in covering, remote areas so we would know about, distant fires that impact nobody's community, it's just all of our air, or you're focusing on protecting, communities?
So we're focusing on protecting communities. And the reason for that is that 95% of fires are started by people, either directly or indirectly. And by
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean by roads, by people around the community starting a fire inadvertently, or indirectly through infrastructure like power lines that sometimes can spark a fire or cause a fire.
Sometimes.
And so the idea behind this is to protect all those critical areas with truly rapid detection and give as much early notice as possible. We're also one of the few technologies out there that combines a visual camera, a thermal camera, and a chemical sensor, all processed on board of our unit, so that you can basically get the earliest warning possible from any given technology. And then you have other technologies like Dryad that you mentioned, like N5 sensors that can cover all the remaining areas further out to know that you have a problem.
But without the visual confirmation.
Correct. And that's
Okay.
critical because a lot of the remote areas, even in a valley near a community, it could take a firefighter 2 or 3 hours to get out to a location to even confirm a fire. And every minute counts in a fire. And if you can respond to it quicker, you might be able to control it in a way that is not possible today.
Yeah. Um, so you've got the visual, the IR, and the chemical sensor, the sniffers.
Correct.
Um, there's a good likelihood, based on where you're placing your cameras, because I assume there's some type of calculus that goes on that,
Mm-hmm.
would lean towards putting the cameras in the most likely places to be ignition sources. There's a likelihood that you might also potentially be the closest weather station, right? If you had barometric wind speed and wind direction on that, is there a capability to add that functionality there?
We already have it.
You do.
So
That's
our
what. Okay.
deployments
I'm just giving you
have
a chance to say it,
no, it's
Gilberto.
okay. And we have all that built in. We do have a weather station built into our units. The anemometer is an optional depending on where it's been deployed, but we do provide that as an available part of our technology. And this is somewhat modeled behind some of the early stations that were developed by UC San Diego actually in 2002. And part of the idea is to combine a lot of these different sensors that they were putting on mountaintops and bring them into slightly different locations. So it's not a new idea either, just like the jet engines, but it's a proven technology that can have a real impact and can be brought to additional locations where the fires are known to start. And I think it is important to know where the wind is blowing, as you mentioned, because that tells you where the fire is going to go, and where to put your jet engines to blow it out.
Right. And we're
Couldn't help
thinking we're
it.
going to use these for, specifically for asset protection,
Yeah.
because once it's 1,000 miles of fire, you know, it's going to do what it's going to do. But when it's coming up against a community that might have, a mile or two of perimeter that's, in the path of the fire, there you could direct a fire around that community. At least that's
And
what we're betting on.
and also the substations to make sure that they keep power and they're able to still respond to a fire. A lot of the fire engines today are being developed to be electric vehicles. Without a substation operating, you will not be able to respond to the fire for a very long time. So those will be critical assets for us to protect in tomorrow's firefighting. And that's another location where protecting the grid will become a critical part of responding to wildfires and making sure that all of that is still working, because that infrastructure is going to become an integral part. And that's something which, I think needs to be thought about, needs to be mentioned today, so that we bring technologies to bear to protect those assets during a fire. And also, the community depends on that power and depends on that water available from the nearby water districts. And that's why we're looking to deploy our technology in water district locations and in utility locations, including substations, to know how you can protect those assets and keep electricity flowing that we're becoming more and more dependent on.
Yeah, and there's, you point out there's some pluses and minuses to electric fire trucks,
Yep.
right? One of the downsides is if the grid goes down, you can't recharge it and your fire truck is sitting there.
Yep.
I guess one of the positives, though, is that because they don't have a combustion engine, they don't rely on oxygen to function. And many times these fires end up creating very oxygen depleted environments, which have led to the loss of fire trucks that couldn't start or maintain because of the lack of oxygen. So mixed
Yep.
blessing, and we'll see how that turns out. And you pointed out, what I call, trees as silt fences. That right, trees are basically silt fences that stop mud from running into water that we need.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we put the Delphire cameras down in there, that would be a priority, right? Protect the trees that are protecting the waterways.
Yep. And the community
and the reservoir.
Let's not forget that certain places can suffer from mudslides if the vegetation is wiped out. I mean, the vegetation really is what keeps a lot of the landscape in place near communities that are on a very steep slope. And while the community might survive the immediate fire, if it is not protected far enough out, then you can end up with a mudslide the next time it rains, like in the last few days here in California and throughout the West Coast. And you end up with a big problem and maybe even more damage to the homes that way. So
that's true. And the firefighters depend on a water supply, and the water supply can literally be choked out when a mudslide goes and clogs up the river and the lake. So a town could run dry and lose its ability to get the water that it needs to fight the next fire. It's a pretty vicious cycle there. What's it like dealing with an environment where you see so much climactic violence?
I mean, this is why I signed up to do what I'm doing right now, Steve. I mean, it's an opportunity to make a real impact on the infrastructure that keeps us living every day. And I personally Lived out of a hotel for about 3 months after an apartment fire while I was in grad school. So I got to experience different aspects of dealing with the after effects of a fire.
Yeah.
I looked around during COVID and was looking at the air quality outside. I remember going over to my parents' house during a fire to check in on them, and there was so much smoke in the house that sometimes you don't even realize just how bad it is until somebody comes over and tells you, "Hey, put up some HEPA filters if you can, or run this, and it will clear up the house." So there's a lot of different effects that I started seeing, and I started looking at the problem and picked, like you said, one small part of the overall pie that I could tackle based on my previous experience, and that was the early detection component to provide what I saw as the missing piece to detection. I mean, as you mentioned, there was Alert California being built out. There was Pano competing from the mountaintop. There was a lot of chemical sensors coming out. But then there was the really hard areas to cover where there's no reception, maybe no good power available. And that's where Delphire is focused. It's really giving good visibility on that last 10%. And also, it's really important to tackle the last 10% because a lot of the communities that are there are actually the more vulnerable ones to fire and the more vulnerable ones to loss. A lot of diverse communities are in these areas, and without the protection of our system, they may not have a home to go back to. So I think it's really important to cover that last 10%. And while it's the hardest one, it should not be ignored. We can't afford to ignore it.
Yeah. So how far along are you? You've got working prototypes that are deployed out in the field.
Yep.
Uh, Paying customers?
Not yet, but I think
Okay.
that might change very soon. We have a few quotes out to communities, and we're really excited to work with communities. If you think about our technology, it's affordable when looked at as a group of homes. You mentioned you've got maybe 40, 50 neighbors in a community. And if you put up a couple cameras in, and amortize them over a few years, you're looking at maybe 20, $30 per home. That's affordable compared to the cost of homes in California. It's actually, a relatively modest investment to get that early warning and sleep better at night. So the way we're looking at it, it's equivalent to what you might pay for a Ring doorbell. And if everybody buys in, you can get your community a better early warning system. And compared to the cost of homes, especially here on the West Coast, it's kind of a no-brainer in my view. So I think we'll start seeing some more traction there. And we're investigating a lot of other use cases, as I mentioned, for infrastructure protection, critical asset protection, and generally trying to understand, similar to what you're doing, a little bit of modeling to see how much time will it take for a fire to go from point A to point B for a critical asset. So where would we have to put up our camera to have an impact on where you can deploy your system, for example? How much time would you need? And those are all critical factors that we need to consider on where we deploy our Sentinel system to make sure that there's enough time to respond and protect the community or protect the critical assets that keep the community functioning after the fire as well. Because it's not just enough to save the community. If you have no water and no power, you're not going to be able to go back home potentially for months.
So you want to protect that critical infrastructure,
As well.
keep the,
Yeah.
keep the grid from burning down, keep the water plant from becoming non-functional, keep
Well,
the waterways open. So, yeah, you got a pretty good list of things you want to protect there.
yeah. I mean, hey, Steve, do you want to live without water or without electricity for several weeks? I don't think any of us would sign up for that.
You can take my electricity before you take my water, please.
Yeah.
Right? We can always flashlights and whatnot to get by, but when you lose your water, like your house, it becomes pretty useless.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why it's critical, I think, to protect both of those.
Yeah. So what range of coverage? Is it limited by how far can you see? I guess for the visual, how close do you have to be to a fire before the onboard system can say that's a fire? Could it tell you 100 miles away, 10 miles away? Do you have to be 40 feet away? Like, how far away can you see the IR, and how far away can the visual part be construed to be a fire?
The IR, I mean, we got pretty good pictures out to a mile. The detection generally for the IR is considered about half a mile, but because we're overlaying different sensors, it's more about confirmation that there is an issue. We quote a mile for detection on our system in each direction, or around a mile. We quote that for a different reason, and we're being very conservative here. The reason why we're quoting a mile is because that's for very rapid detection of a fire that is starting in direct line of sight. So imagine you have a ridge that you can see from your house. It would basically be about protecting from your home to that ridge anything that starts there. And most of the fires, as you mentioned, get started by people. So that's where you want to have the most rapid response, because you'll have the less time to get out. We've also proven the system up to, our latest detection was 8.3 miles away from an indirect fire. However, that was a prescribed pile burn. So these are small piles of wood, and those took about an hour before they reached over the ridge where they were visible from that camera. And that shows you a good metric to think about why a mountaintop system is not enough, and why you do need our system looking over the community. That 1 hour can be enough to start smoldering, grow a large smoldering fire that then can be picked up as soon as there's some wind conditions that will allow it to grow. And then all of a sudden, instead of having a small fire which is growing, you have a huge smoldering area that's going to grow very, very quickly in a lot of different areas. So that's what we're trying to tackle, is those really threatening fires to the community.
So let me ask about cross-market pollination thing here. Mm-hmm. Is there any reason that Pano couldn't come down into the valleys and Delphire could go up on top of mountains, and your systems would then be, both doing something similar?
Well, we have different sensors built in, and we built our hardware to be deployed everywhere, even where there is no power available. We're not using off-the-shelf hardware, so it would be very difficult to adapt a system that is using a lot of bandwidth in remote areas.
Yeah.
We've really built our system to also analyze everything into a package that as an onboard processor. And overall, we're using about 5 to 6 watts that can be powered by a 2-foot by 2-foot solar panel. So our whole installation footprint is very small, and we provide a different kind of infrastructure that's geared towards going to places where there is no support. Could we function from a mountaintop as well? Probably. I mean, we've demonstrated that it can work from several, about 8 to 10 miles away. It's pretty comparable to what Pano Alert California are doing. But a lot of those view sheds are already being covered by Alert California.
I see.
And so my interest is about supplementing the system with something which is not available today, and working with Alert California, working with Pano. And in the future, I see a lot of synergy where our system can be used for early detection. We can notify someone like Alert California or potentially Pano and tell them where to have their cameras look to track the fires as expanding.
And then you have Aurora Tech, look down with their satellites, and pretty soon, right, you have enough companies deploying enough sensors that you could start to get some pretty good situational awareness of what's going on.
Correct.
So it's a collaborative effort, right? Nobody's got the answer, but collectively, enough data gets generated to be useful.
Yep. And I think it's going to take, a little bit of working together to share those alerts and the geolocation of those alerts so that you can cross-confirm. For example, as you mentioned, from space, you can tell when there's a hotspot, and you could train. Our cameras are fixed, so we're always monitoring area, and we think that's important because it actually gives you a lot of information about what happened before the fire. How did this fire start? Was it somebody out there that, was trying to start a fire, or was it an accident? And having that information can be important to prevent multiple events from happening. A lot of times when somebody was trying to start fires, we've seen events where they started maybe several fires over a period of days. And that's also something that by continually monitoring the area, we're able to collect data that would not be possible from a mountaintop using a camera that spins around and is not constantly monitoring the area. So we're approaching a different problem. And like you said, having the collaboration is really important. And at the end of the day, we'll have to figure out how to share the data to make it really quickly effective and cross-confirm all these different detections from space, from a mountaintop, from a valley, and chemically around it as the fire spread.
So that, in my mind, that would create a demand for another company or entity
Mm-hmm.
that receives the stream from all of the, you've got the Delphire stream coming in, and the Pano stream coming in, and the California Alert system coming in, and Aurora Tech coming in, synthesize all that data, and then send that to the response agencies.
I mean, Alert California and Alert West are already doing that, right?
Yeah, I don't know if are they taking your data yet, or are they on track to do that?
We're working towards that, and the
Okay.
idea is to create a more collaborative effort. And I think we will see more of that happening in the future, which is collating that data and making it available to everybody. I think another key difference from us is that we're trying to make that data available. We're not trying to restrict somebody into using our portal or our front end. We're making an API available so that you can pull our data and know exactly what you're looking at, and then use that to inform your own AI models about where you may optimize a response, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'm curious about this other aspect. Let's say I want to, have coverage over my valley, or the
Mm-hmm.
valley where my home is. Well, every bit of my valley is owned by private homeowners.
Yep.
And there's probably somebody's house that's the perfect vantage spot for seeing the rest of the valley.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be the process of, going to a private homeowner and saying, we want to stick this thing on your land?
I mean, so far we've found that people are very supportive about it because they recognize that the wildfire problem is a real issue, and we've done a couple of deployments of that type. Ironically, one of them got hit by a redwood tree during the last storm. The unit survived. We put it back out in the field, actually, but this is the kind of thing that happens, and I think it's going to take a collaborative effort with the community and with the people. If there is power available, our deployment footprint is very small. You're talking about a 1 foot by 1 foot box. So it's like maybe the size of a shoebox. And if you've seen our unit, they are pretty compact, and we think they're pretty good looking. I think, we've only received
They're very good looking.
So we've worked
size
hard
wise.
to...
It seems like, with people are already used to, where there's a camera with two little floodlights on the side of it. It's basically nothing more than that.
It's about 10 inches tall,
size wise,
a foot wide, and 8 inches deep. So the whole unit is very compact, weighs about 10 pounds. You can mount it anywhere. We've mounted these to railings up on a roof. We've mounted these to like a patio. And really, it's about where do you get the best vantage point to protect the community. And we've also put independent poles where if somebody has like a steep hill coming down, it's really important to protect that hill because the fire travels uphill very quickly. And so we can put just a regular fence post, 1.5-inch steel conduit, and we can deploy our camera anywhere on that steel conduit by using a solar panel in the box. I can provide you a couple pictures of that so you can put them in if you want them to editing.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Basically, The idea there is to have a completely freestanding system that can be deployed at the edge of a property where it's not as visible, or behind a tree where there's still good solar availability, and that will work anywhere and give good visibility outwards from the community. And we're also able to obviously shade out certain areas of the picture so that privacy is maintained for everybody in the community, but still get good visibility out in the areas that are critical.
So you're seeing the fire, but not the hot tub.
Correct. I mean, I think that's important. We all like our privacy, right? You don't
Sure.
want one of my cameras looking at your hot tub.
I don't
So,
care, you
well,
know.
your neighbors
And what
may
do
not
I?
feel the same way, right?
I
So,
know, right? The 220 motor under my hot tub is as likely to be the ignition source as anything else in my community. But
true. I mean,
yeah, yeah. But I appreciate your sensitivity to people's desire for privacy there. Um, on your comms protocol,
mhm.
uh, if you're within cellular, do you use that? And
Yes.
then if you're outside of that, then you use satellite. And are they like mutually redundant?
Yeah, we don't, just because of the cost, we don't normally put a satellite uplink unless it's needed in the area. But generally, we use LTE wherever possible. And we're looking at other options down the line through some collaborations that I'm very excited about for providing additional connectivity to some areas around the community from a central uplink. For example, you could share a connection from the town by beaming to certain locations near it if they're within line of sight, which our system generally should be. So we have a few different options that we can make available. The problem here is that no location really is alike. Everybody's location is a little bit different. And the same thing is true about how do we select where to put the cameras. And we look at a lot of historical data. We have some advisors that have a lot of fire experience, so we look a little bit at the local region and what is the best location really to put these cameras. We don't rely on a model that just looks at what's the best view that we can get, right? We rely
Right.
on a model that's what's going to be most effective from a firefighting perspective for your community. So that's
And
another
when,
thing.
right?
That's and when exactly. So that's what sets us apart from a lot of the other systems out there. We're more looking at something which is tailored towards people and towards what people need, rather than towards just making it a system that tries to catch all.
And with regard to the size and portability of the unit, depending on the time of year, there are certain areas where there's fires more likely to be here than there,
Mm-hmm.
and so you could relocate these systems pretty easily if they're on LCE, uh, based on where the highest probabilities of fire are.
Yeah, we're looking also developing a trailerized version that you might be able to move around for certain areas. But generally, we find that a lot of fire risk for a community is going to be in a few key locations, and you never really know. That's the problem where a fire is going to start, and so covering more the higher threat locations that are likely to have a fire roll into town really is about what we're looking at rather than just plain fire risk. Plain fire risk is important, but also how likely is that fire to impact the communities downstream or down the valley from it, based on previous wind patterns, previous fires in the area, and there's a lot of good historical data that can help guide that as a way to understand where you're going to make the most impact with these cameras. It's not a system that's made to cover every area, as I mentioned, but really have a outsized impact by deploying a few units around the community. And we have unfortunately seen several communities impacted by fire recently where many lives were lost, many homes were lost, and where an early warning system that gave them a picture to see, yeah, I got a real issue, I need to get out now, would have been critical.
Right, because people are visual learners for the most part, and
We are.
will believe the picture of the fire above whatever the radio says or the notice from the sheriff or whatever happens, right? And you see the fire, and you're like, I know that house, I know that neighborhood. I
Yep.
better get the heck out of here.
Yep.
And and you have more tools, right? Because other parts of the wildfire industrial complex, we'll call ourselves, is it,
Hmm.
even though we're just like all micro startups, but you've got companies like Athena and Kiron Digital,
Hmm.
that do a pretty good job being able to predict where the next fire is going to be based on a variety of conditions, right? Moisture and wind and how many people are in the area at that time and what's the condition of the power lines, right? But they can tell you with a lot more certainty or higher probability modeling,
Yep.
even down to 10-meter resolution, where those spots in the community are that are most likely to be the ignition source for the next big fire.
Yep. And putting up, early detection systems like ours there can have a good impact. And I think that we will see some of that happening in the near future and more collaborative efforts. And also on the response side, we're looking or built some partnerships with a few companies like uh, Helipod, for example. They're manufacturing helicopter dip sites,
Yep.
and we're putting in the core of our technology, meaning the AI part, the computing part, and the communications part without a lot of the sensors inside their helicopter dip sites. All of a sudden, we're able to automate the fill valve, and we're able to make water available without someone having to drive there on a high fire risk day. We're able to operate the night lights for night operations on the tank. So we're looking at this as a bigger picture than just a detection, but what do you do when you detect a fire? Do I send the pictures to you? Do we start making water available near the community so that you have water available to either respond with a helicopter or respond with your system where you need, no matter what, you need water or fire retardant available, right?
Right.
And so our goal is to pair the detection component with the early response component and making sure that there's also resources available to fight the fire. Because without resources, you can't fight that fire near the community. And
Right.
that's another thing that sets us apart from just being an early detection company. Our technology, since we built it ourselves, we built our own hardware, it can be retasked for a lot of different use cases. For
I see.
example, if you've set up, sprinklers or fire retardant lines near your community, you could use our system to trigger those last line defenses as well. So it needs to be a multi-layer defense system that leverages a lot of different elements on not just the detection component, but also on the response component.
Very interesting. So it can almost act as an IFTT for anyone else's system, right?
Correct.
If you've got a Citratech system or a Fortress system or something like that, that's
Yep.
supposed to auto deploy and you don't want it to deploy unless there's actually a fire, then once you have verified, yeah, we have confirmation there's a fire, then people go ahead and, fire off their sprinkler systems
Yep. And
because
that
those aren't
saves.
really easily replenishable.
No.
Right. You one
And
shot at
it's,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And you want to take the shot at the right time. You don't want to take the shot and then you end up getting some rain and you got everything washed off and it's no longer
Right.
potentially effective. So,
Right. Yeah. It's
that's
kind of
yeah. So that's another thing that we're looking at in terms of technology and how what we've built can be used in a lot of different use cases. So
very
uh,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, it's necessary, right?
Right.
Uh,
And so Do you have an intention that users would have some type of an API and then they could, program it based on whatever IFTT needs they have?
Yeah.
Or would this be a capability that they would ask you, hey, can you program this machine to do this for us? And then, you would download the upgrade to that local machine.
We've built it to be pretty standard. So it just uses like a standard industrial controller. So we provide, up to 4 different IOs, and those can be used, that's in and out systems that can be used to trigger a relay, for example. So if you've got a standard 12-volt relay, you can use that signal to trigger any type of industrial control. So the way we're looking at it is, that should serve the majority of people, but we're definitely willing to develop something which is more customized and have the ability to bring online additional use cases if there is enough of a market for them.
I see. Or if even if it's a small market, but it doesn't cost much to make the upgrade.
Correct.
And let's do it systemically. Okay. And you talked about an example of being able to, just turn the lights on.
Yep.
Right. Turn on the light so responders can see where they're going. So this is like the fire equivalent of, your dasher is approaching, turn on your porch light.
Pretty much. I know it sounds trivial, but those are real problems. And if you can do those remotely rather than having to spend the manpower, quite frankly. I mean, I think one thing that we've seen in the last fires has been that manpower has been limiting.
And we'll get more limited.
Yeah. So the more we can help, the better I see it as a force multiplier to make people available in other areas where some tasks can be, like you said, made simple by turn on the lights or turn on the fill valve for the tank.
Right. So, what do you see on the broader side? If we were to zoom up from our respective, little pieces of the pie here, what are you seeing as like the big drivers of wildfire, and where do you think we need to be going to minimize the incidence and the size of fires, not just, how we respond to them once they've started? Like, is there a prevention component that anyone has exposed you to that I'm not saying I've seen anything that looked affordable or appealing, but I wondered if you have.
Not really, to be honest. I mean, if fires were easily predictable, we would not be having as many as we have. I think at the end of the day, it's very important to do proper vegetation management around communities, have good defensible space around your home. Those are critical things that, we all are empowered to do on an individual level. I think as we look at, let's break that down a little more. What are the underlying causes of most fires?
Well, fuel, oxygen, heat, and chemical reaction. If we could remove the oxygen from this planet, we would have no more fires.
Yeah,
but there would be other consequences to that.
We might not be so happy.
But it's people, right? It's over availability of fuel from poor vegetation management and human activity, be that power lines or hot mufflers on dry grass or
so you
whatever,
can somewhat,
right? So
it's really hard to predict where that's going to happen, right? How do you predict where somebody is going to drive over the grass, or where somebody's going to have a chain on the back of their truck that's starting a fire on the side of the road? How do you predict where somebody's going to have their gender reveal party with fireworks?
Exactly.
These are all things that happened and they keep happening. And so that's you can predict where the fire risk might be from vegetation. But how do you predict where people are going to be at any given time?
Yeah. And now you'd probably have pushback on the gender reveal party because, the child should be able to choose their own gender identity when they grow up and not have it determined by their parents, right?
I'm staying out of that one, Steve.
Oh, I'm staying out of it too. I'm just poking the bear there a little bit, right? Yeah. But the fire, they ended up being sued for $1.8 million, and that doesn't replace the homes or the lives that were impacted. So there's no going back. There's no resetting the clock on these things. Like once these things happen, so. And we can't really, we can just, we know that if it's Labor Day weekend, then there's a big park there. People are going to be in there, and there's going to be barbecues, and somebody's going to let some embers loose.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of things that are fairly predictable. Power lines are generally not going anywhere physically. So if you're going to have a power line, initiated fire, it's probably going to be along the power lines.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these things are, very predictable, and like the low hanging fruit of detection, right?
Yeah.
What do you, as you scale up, what are you thinking of in terms of like affordability? Do you have a pricing model in mind for where you are and where you'll be?
Yeah, I think affordability for these systems is key. I mean, at the end of the day, they need to be affordable for a community to be able to, choose to deploy these. Our technology, came out of the SBIR program. So the Small Business Innovation and Research. There are grants from the federal government to support small businesses developing technology. In our case, we were funded by the Department of Energy to tackle exactly the predictable problem that you were mentioning, which is the power lines that are not moving and monitoring those. I think overall, this is a problem that's going to evolve over time. And as we gain more understanding of where people are, we might be able to tune the frequency at which we're monitoring for events for higher risk days. And that's one thing that we're working to enable right now, is making that change about how we monitor the landscape or monitor the events. And there might be some of the data that will tell us, okay, this is likely to lead to a fire, or somebody has a barbecue in the area. We want to monitor that area a little bit more carefully because it's got a higher likelihood of sparking a more broad fire around it. So that's something which is missing today from the system that I think is very important to scale up. And how do you differentiate also man-made events from a real fire? There's a lot of issues in today's systems that, bring up a lot of false positives from even prescribed burns, or from steam being generated by industry, or any of these factors could affect a visual system that is looking for the area. So I think these are big challenges that need to be tackled. And the way you tackle these is by bringing in additional information, like you mentioned, from where are these prescribed burns happening? Where is the industry? And so there needs to be more integration of all these information sources so that everybody is aware of where to expect these other events, and lower the rate of potential false positives, because no system is perfect. And that's something which is important to keep in mind. We're doing the best that we can do technologically today, and we're pushing the envelope. And I think this is true for all startups and all companies that are trying to tackle the fire problem. But it's important to recognize that no system out there is perfect, and we're always striving to improve them.
Yeah, and with regard to false positives, just because it's positive and it's supposedly false, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a real threat. When I see smoke, I go to this great little app called Watch Duty,
Mm-hmm.
and I see and I say, oh, somebody's got a prescribed ditch burn or vegetation burn. That doesn't really lower my anxiety level, because that's just as likely to turn into a real fire. It just means that at the time when it started, there was already, some response capability on site, but not necessarily the ability to contain it. So just because
Yeah.
it shows up on the list as prescribed burn, that doesn't mean like we don't keep an eye on it. especially if you live in Santa Fe.
Yep. And, that's where I think a lot of these different technologies coming together can have an impact, and maybe knowing ahead of time what the expected perimeter of some of these prescribed burns is, or knowing, a lot of these get announced, there's a prescribed burn in this area, but actually knowing what is the expected limit of where this fire is supposed to be. This information in the future needs to be made available to technology companies like ours, like Aurotech, monitoring from space, so that if things are starting to go bad past those boundaries, you get an early warning, like you mentioned, to not worry about the smoke being there until you have a real problem that's gotten out of hand.
Yeah, right. So that's a great idea of not just announcing the burn, but announcing what the
Perimeter.
boundaries are supposed to be. Yeah, what's that perimeter? So that if I see it, 8 blocks away, I'm not thinking, oh, that's just the prescribed burn. No, that's a prescribed burn that got away.
Yep.
Um, Let me
Uh,
ask you one other question. So a lot of startups, do uh, look towards the SBIR program,
mhm,
uh, and you worked with DOE.
mhm.
Um, and I guess you could only answer this question if it's a positive answer. But what was your experience working, on through an SBIR grant?
So yeah, we're supported by the funding from DOE. We're technically not working with DOE, just to clarify that one, or be
Yes.
very technical. But we're very lucky to have the support of this grant from DOE, and it's been a good experience. It's given us opportunity to develop a technology that's fit for the market. One thing that's not very well known about the program is that there's some funding for the research component, and now they've created a second component that they call the phase shift program, and that is about doing more market discovery and more market fit testing for your technology, so that what you're creating actually has good customers at the end of it. And I think both of those components put together have been very helpful in making sure that we bring a technology which is well informed by the end user, but also the best technology that can be brought to the market today by combining a lot of different potential detection methods and making sure that fires are caught in the earliest state possible, basically.
Yeah, no, I
And
get the mission for sure. I just know that technical founders, well, speaking for myself, we're shop people. Like
mhm.
we like to build stuff and make stuff work, and we're generally a little bit less like paperwork people. And so I just wondered, since we're considering it too,
Mhm.
on the SBIR side, some of our internal pushback is, oh my God, this is going to be a regulatory nightmare. We're going to have all this compliance paperwork to do, and you know, true, false, or somewhat true.
Um, I think if you set things up correctly from the beginning, it's going to be easily manageable, so long as you know or have good advisors that are, well versed in the space. You're able to, get the right support structure in place around your small business. Then it becomes more manageable. There are companies out there that specialize in helping you with the accounting and the bookkeeping and all the different components that go into reporting behind these grants.
Not a lot of people
So,
crying, oh, I wanted to do the bookkeeping.
yeah, I mean, and I think as a technical founder, the bigger challenge is not that aspect. The bigger
Yeah.
challenge is really having a good understanding of the market, being proactive and getting out there and talking to people and getting out of your maybe comfort zone, and figuring out, who am I selling this to, and what are the needs of the community, and what else would, if Steve, who's on the HOA board, were to buy these for his community, what else would you like to see them do? Like you mentioned, the weather and understanding a little bit more about what's needed to make it viable for a community space. And I think, affordability at the end of the day is something which is key. Bringing these at a level that they can be scaled very, very widely is going to be very important, and it's something that we focused on from the technology aspect since day one. And we keep improving it for that reason. And sometimes a lot of time is actually spent on making a technology viable, or some of the research can be about making your technology viable for the market by simplifying aspects that may not be intuitive from day one based on the feedback that you're getting from people. So having that feedback loop from your customer is key. And it's the difference between having a business at the end of the day where people are buying your product, or people are simply looking at you and say, hey, that's a cool product, but I wouldn't buy it.
Right. That's the best advice I hear for founders is, if you're not talking to your customers every day, you're talking to the wrong people.
Yep.
Yeah. Unless your co-founders are going to be your client, figure out who your real clients are and build your product with them.
Yeah.
Because people support what they create, right? And
that's another big challenge as a startup, right? It's it can be very hard to rise above the noise. There's a lot of startup out there. There's a lot of competing technology out there. And one thing that we found challenging is even getting into the room with our customers can be very difficult because they've been approached with a lot of different technology, and some of it may have been, not working as intended. And
yeah. So, well, I could give you a secret for getting good conversations with your market if you want. Yeah. Start a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I should, but that's one of those things that I haven't been able to bring myself to do in the limited amount of time that we have each day. It's
I get it. I get it.
It's that's one thing which as a startup founder, I'm sure you can relate to. It's we all get 24 hours, no matter who you are. Right. And we have to decide what we put those 24 hours towards. And I'm sure you can relate to the challenges of having a limited budget.
Sure, absolutely.
Trying to bring really groundbreaking technology in the U.S. or new technology in the U.S. is tricky. It requires the right.
It is challenging. It is challenging. And my own experience, with the fire break was that important potential customers who wouldn't return my calls for 2 years, respond within 10 minutes to a request to, get to talk on a podcast. So,
yeah,
it's an entry tool there, but also just really important to, to have communal conversations around this, because everybody's working on a little piece of it, and it's how those pieces get put together that's going to determine if we get a successful, cohesive approach to wildfire. Because my machine's not going to do it, your cameras aren't going to do it. Like, it all has to be working together. So we all have to know each other. The community has to know what we're doing. We have to figure out how this all interlocks to make a thing. And with regard to competition, I say, you know what, there's enough fire for everybody.
I agree there. That's why I said.
And there'll be, and if there's not enough, there'll be more next year, and there'll be way more 10 years from now. So,
hopefully not way more, but I'm sure we'll have quite a few more down the line. Unfortunately, after, it's one thing is people see a lot of rain, and fire is the last thing on their mind. But the year after a big rainstorm, especially when it dries up, it's actually the worst time.
Yeah, right. More growth.
Yeah.
Feed more fuels. Yeah, you can get, I think, up to like a 20x growth if you have a wet season.
Mm-hmm.
By the time that dries out, you got something that's going to be, my jets and your cameras aren't going to be a match for it.
Nope. And here in California, that can happen in 6 months. I mean,
right.
This winter we had a record rainfall, and probably by July or August we're going to start seeing, unfortunately, the effects of that. And a lot of people are, oh, I've got till next year to prepare for this.
Yeah, no, today. Do your prep now.
Yeah,
Well,
even though it's
Gilberto,
wet.
it was great sharing this hour with you.
Thank you.
We have a lot more to cover, and I think we'll join up together again and share some more pearls of our experience. I don't know that I would call it wisdom at this point, and neither of us are old enough to label it that. But we're chalking up some good experiences towards that. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Steve. I really appreciate it. It's been a really great chat.
Awesome. Superb. Well, this is the infamous and world famous, well, not even infamous yet, right? But you're working on that too, right? The hardworking Gilberto DeSalvo, developing cameras to spot the areas where the current cameras aren't cutting it, and in an affordable way that we absolutely need. So thanks for the work that you're doing. And thank you all for joining us on The Fire Break. The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. And I could explain what we do, but it's easier to look it up. Just go to teamwildfire.com and you'll see that we're using cool jet engines to blow out fires and AIs to figure out how to do it. At least that's our plan anyway. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.